I'll call it to order with a microphone on this time. Right, thank you. Right, apologies I've received. Apologies from Councillor Walton and Councillor John Michael. Any other apologies that we think about everybody else here? I think. Yeah. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other disclosable interests. Any? No. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Anybody got any comments on the minutes of the last meeting? No. Can I take that we're accepted? Oh, Kath is proposing, thank you. And Peter seconding. And those in favour, please show. Any against? No, that's unanimous. Thank you. Right, Chair's announcements. Merry Christmas, before I forget. Have a good Christmas, everybody. I hope you don't get snowed in. Our officers tonight, we've got Simon Jones, our Development Manager, and Anna Priestley next to me, our Case Officer, Jenny Ager, I'll say it right for once, thank you, and Bronwyn Tompkins, our Democratic Services Officer, all with us there. Right, that's all I've got to say on that item. So we're on to the update report. Has everybody had a chance to read the update report? Anybody not? Right, okay, so we'll go from that. And then in that case, then we're on to you, Anna. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just before you do, have the various people seen the update report at all?
That's that.
No, not us. I'm talking about the visitors.
I don't know. Have you seen the update report? No. No. If we... You
can have mine.
Yeah. Don't have one. I haven't got one. No. It's okay. I'll read mine at home. I'll give you a couple of minutes to read it through before we go on then.
It was published at midday.
Yeah. It has been published, yeah. But we'll give them time so we're aware of it. Might help, actually. So they got sight of one. Okay.
No, you did.
Mr. Chairman, while they're reading those, can I come back with a sort of possibly a point of order regarding planning applications, if that's possible? We've had various planning applications over the last 12 months, some of which include adopted roads and some include roads that are not going to be adopted. I take exception to this really, but we've had one that we refused. Well, we didn't refuse it, we've granted it permission, or more or less granted it permission up at Stourport. But I have been told today by Paul that there's a possibility that they will not be adopting the roads. Now, the difficulty here is that there's a condition regarding, that's a big estate because there's, I think, 80, 100?
145.
145, got that wrong, didn't I? If that is not adopted, then there's no way are we going to be able to collect 140 bins from the corner or the junction of that. So we will have to go onto that site. Now at present, we're not putting a condition into these planning applications. And I believe we should be putting this standard condition about collecting bins and the roads being adopted should go into everyone that we do in case, or everyone that's got roads in it, because if the roads aren't being adopted, we're going to finish up in dreadful trouble. I'll leave that for the officers to give a response to.
Right, not particularly at this moment, but I think it's something we need to take notice and discuss. Right, so we'll go on with our officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land at Pick and End in the village of Hanley Swan and proposes the construction of 14 affordable dwellings with associated parking and landscaping. The application site is adjacent to the defined development boundary for Hanley Swan and is an allocated site for market housing up to 10 dwellings within the adopted neighbourhood plan. The site consists of a small grass field bound by fencing and hedgerows with trees. The site is immediately surrounded by roads to the north and west, with houses and gardens beyond these. A house and garden to the east, Cherry Tree Cottage, and a grass field to the south. The local area is a general sort of mosaic of grassland fields interspersed with small pockets of woodland and residential areas. The site is not within designated landscape or conservation area, but Cherry Tree Cottage adjacent to the site is a Grade 2 listed building. The local primary school is located on the opposite side of Welland Close, to the southern corner of the site. The location plan here outlines the site in red, and I've just provided a slightly more clear plan which shows the site, which is blocked in the lighter yellow, I suppose, with the nearby list of buildings. Particularly, you can see Cherry Tree Cottage adjacent, but then also Apple Tree Cottage and Quakers Farm, as well as the nearest public rights of way, which are the red dashed lines. The application proposes the development of 14 affordable dwellings, partly fronting onto Peck and End and partly grouped around a central access road. The scheme includes one 4-bedroom apartment block to the southwest corner of the site, and that's a slight amendment from Officer's report, which said it was in the northwest, but it's the southwest block. So apologies for that. And the remainder is a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom semi-detached dwellings. The little white blocks you can see in the gardens are the cycle sheds proposed within the garden areas. The proposed building designs are relatively simplistic, brick-built 2-storey structures with contrasting blue brick banding and brick lintels and sills. Windows and doors are proposed to have anthracite grey frames, and grey tiles to the roof are proposed. As per Officer's report, it's recommended that materials are conditioned so that quality and appropriateness of those can be controlled. The proposed maisonettes, which plots 7 to 10, includes some rendered elevations as well, to just offer a small bit of variation. And the overall mix of dwellings is set out on this slide with a 10-year mix split is 71% social rent and 29% intermediate housing products, which is 10 and 4 dwellings, to be provided as shared ownership. A proposed landscape master plan was provided with the application. It should be noted that, again, there's a condition recommended for a complete landscaping scheme to be provided, and this will have slightly altered from this because of SUD's plans that have been provided since, but it just shows sort of the intention of where the green spaces are going to go and the opportunities for planting. Just to point out on this scheme, there is off-site Lelandii planting shown to the south. It's outside of the red line area, but I think officers are in agreement with the landscape officer that that's not particularly appropriate species of planting. We would be looking for native hedgerow and independent tree planting as part of the landscaping scheme. This next plan relates to the late updates sheet. So this is the plan provided by the applicant yesterday, just to show how, following the site visit with members on yesterday morning, how soakaways can be accommodated with the site, and respond to the Land Drainage Authority comments. As well as the land drainage comments that I provided on the update sheet, I've actually had a further comment from them in regard to this submitted plan today, just saying that the plan is satisfactory, and they just repeat the suggested condition. So the final details of drainage to be conditioned. Turning to photographs, again, I've added to these slightly following yesterday's site visit. So these are the views across the site, and just providing the original spring summer views that I'd put on there, and then some winter sites, more recent views. These are the views along Picken End, showing a couple of the properties down there, and the tall hedgerow along the Picken End boundary. And again, more views. You can see across Welland Road into Cherry Blossom Close, opposite the development site. This is looking towards the northwest corner of the application site, and views from north to south along Welland Road. Again, there's a view north from the site along Welland Road, just picking out some of the properties that are along that street scene. Another view into Picken End from Welland Road. And this is actually taken from Google Street Scene, but just to give another view of a more recent development, Chapman's Orchard, to show again some of the variation in the design and the properties around. The officer recommendation is for approval of the application subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure the relevant planning obligations. The principle of the development of this site is considered to be very clearly acceptable. It's an allocated site within the neighbourhood plan, and it's important to note that even if it were not an allocated site, the proposal meets with the policy requirements of SWDP 16, which is the rural exception sites policy, and as set out in the officer's report, is locationally acceptable, having regard to the fact that we're in the tilted balance and don't have a 5-year housing land supply at the moment. The contribution that the proposal makes to affordable housing deficit should, in your officer's opinion, also be afforded significant weight, and that would be in line with a number of appeal decisions we've had over, particularly recently, but over the past year. And I think these factors weigh heavily in favour of the proposal when considering the benefits and the harms. It's noted there will be a degree of harm arising from the development with regard to the impact on the setting of the listed building, particularly Cherry Tree Cottage, and also by reason of the impact on the character of the area with the loss of the boundary hedgerow to the north and slightly on the west, and the wider landscape setting. However, your officers do not consider that the negative impact of the identified harm would outweigh the significant benefits identified. Furthermore, it's important to take account of the allocation of the site within the neighbourhood plan, because developing this site for 10 dwellings, market dwellings, would in reality have a similar built footprint to the 14 dwellings proposed in this application. It's your officer's view that the majority of the impacts on the setting of the listed building, the landscape character, would be also inevitable with the development of the site for the allocated amount. The site seeks to mitigate harms as far as possible with the green buffer between Cherry Tree Cottage and the new dwellings, and the green space and opportunities for landscaping to the southern area of the site between the new houses and the open countryside. Officers consider the proposal complies with the relevant planning policies, and the identified impact on heritage assets and landscape harm would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of providing 14 affordable dwellings in the absence of a 5-year housing land supply. And it's for these reasons that
Thank you, Anna. Right, first speaker, I think, is Parish Council representative, Councillor Sue Adeney. Adeney.
Yes, ex-district councillor. I've still got the scars. Do I have to press any button? We didn't have these. Oh, right, here we go. Thank you, Chairman. Halle Castle Parish Council prides itself in being a progressive council who takes opportunities afforded to them to maintain the vibrancy and vitality of its villages. As a result, for example, we steered through a successful affordable housing scheme which appeared on your screen a few minutes ago. And producing a neighbourhood development plan early on is another example of this proactivity. It took over 2 years to produce, and it should give us the power to manage growth, which reflects the needs of the community. We even chose sites for development in addition to the SWDP had identified, and this site at Pickenend was one of these. Carefully chosen as a sustainable site because of its proximity to the school, the village hall, and on a bus route. We considered its location in relation to listed buildings and specified 10 dwellings would be sufficient for the site. It's all in our neighbourhood plan. The developer made initial contact with the council to consult with the community, an obligation for major sites of over 10, but this has never materialised, nor has a travel plan. So, Chair, this is our council's main objection. 14 dwellings negates the concept of the neighbourhood plan, which affords a community control over what is built. 10 dwellings allows all the other issues more flexibility. We hear drainage may have been addressed, but also proximity to listed buildings, traffic on the road, and so on, and would make this key plot in the village fit more naturally into the rural aspect. Another issue that concerns my council is the ongoing management of the site by the developer. We would like a condition, should this go through, that a housing association is appointed prior to the building commencing so that in partnership with the parish council, we can ensure that these properties are for people with a local connection and then managed in that manner in perpetuity. This would also ensure the ongoing management of the site and its green infrastructure, which has proved to be a problem in other sites in our villages. So, to summarise, having a neighbourhood development plan should provide us with the assurance that we can influence and enforce our policies. We believe 10 is the right number for this plot and that it should be managed by a recognised housing association. Thank you.
I neglected to tell you you've got 3 minutes, but you managed on 2 minutes 38 seconds.
Oh, I've got time to say more.
You've obviously sort of moderated since you were a councillor, because I'm sure none of the councillors will be as brief. Thank you for that. Right, next speaker is an objector, Steve Gogarty. Gogarty, I'm getting more on tonight.
First.
Thank you.
Ecological appraisals must be less than 2 years old. Conducted October 21, the appraisal is out of date. National databases confirm great crested newts close to the site, and another appraisal cannot start until spring next year. It is to be noted that the landscape officer and the conservation officer are objecting to this development. To counter their objections, quote, the principle of developing this site has already been established by the neighbourhood plan, therefore the loss of green space has already been accepted. I believe this to be nonsense. If the principle established acceptance, there will be no need for a consultation. In addition, the neighbourhood plan is more than 5 years old, so it has reduced weight. The landscape and conservation officers' objections stand. Quote, it is considered that the identified substantial benefits of the scheme could be reasonably considered to outweigh the identified harm. Nowhere has the harm been identified, nor the significance of the heritage site stated within these documents. Therefore, this conclusion cannot be reached. A note on heritage and the calculation of significance. English Heritage gives some guidelines. Where you have one heritage site, the Grade 2 listed building, that's sufficient. Where you have 2, that accumulates. Here we have 3 heritage sites altogether, where they all share a common history of the Blackmore estate. Therefore, the heritage is increased accordingly. This is an incredibly sensitive historical area and requires appropriate treatment. I draw your attention to the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. Section 66 requires authorities to have special regard for preserving a listed building and its setting when determining planning applications. This is a high test and a statutory duty of decision makers and has been tested in the court on many occasions. The courts have interpreted special regard to mean that if any harm arises to a building or its setting, a strong presumption exists against the application. Case officer comments in Landscape Matters, it would be almost impossible to develop the site without some resultant level of harm. The committee cannot show special regard if they disregard the following: the presumption against it, the landscape officer's objection, the conservation officer's objection, that no public consultation took place, that no transport plan is provided with this application, that no up-to-date ecological appraisal is available, and that there's no housing association involvement. I believe these comments are so strong it would survive any appeal. Policy SWDP 13 sets out housing density target at 30 dwellings per hectare. Paragraph 5 allows soft development edges, landscaping and buffer areas adjacent to sensitive areas, specifically listed buildings. Given the density and common history of the heritage assets at this site, this policy allows a reduction to the target 10 houses, and this is not unreasonable. I believe the above arguments are sound, but are technical. But at the heart of this matter is that by engaging with the planning process and making this site available, a responsible community is being penalised by having 40% more houses imposed upon them and suffering an urban encroachment, destroying its rural character forever. I thank you for your attention and urge you to refuse this application.
Thank you for that. Next speaker is the applicant's agent, John Jarrett. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members. Application for 14 affordable houses, as you've heard, on a site within the development boundary and allocated for housing in the neighbourhood plan. As you've heard as well, Malvern does not presently meet its housing or affordable housing requirements, and accordingly, there's a clear presumption in support of the proposals, irrespective of the neighbourhood plan. Your report notes that there's no planning or physical constraints and that the development will integrate with the existing village and all of its facilities, close to the village school, hall and sports playing fields. It contains no buildings, watercourses, ponds or other features of biodiversity value. Now, we've worked closely with your officers to secure an acceptable proposal in terms of design and layout and the relevance to heritage assets. Highways, amenity, biodiversity and landscaping have all been dealt with over a period of 2 years. The proposals will also provide significant contributions to local education provision. Your report supports the proposed mix and states that the units would meet part of an identified affordable housing need. Now, whilst the neighbourhood plan suggests the site should be developed for approximately 10 houses, it does not specify a maximum. Your policies require proposals that should make the best use and the most effective and efficient use of land. The application proposes 14 dwellings, which is a density of 28 dwellings per hectare, below your usual requirement. Any cap on the density of the development would be artificial and fail to maximise the benefits of the proposals for no gain. Your report notes the principle of development has long been accepted and is not considered reasonable or realistic to resist the principle of residential development, and I'd suggest also the numbers. The proposal provides significant benefits, given the lack of a 4-year housing land supply and an undersupply of affordable housing. In terms of the points raised, there is to be a housing association involved, but we cannot get one involved until we have a planning permission. There will be a local connection as part of your normal requirements for the provision of affordable housing. In terms of the listed building issue raised, obviously this would have been considered in respect to the neighbourhood plan. The heritage issue does not mean that development cannot take place, but it means that it must be carefully considered and that the benefits outweigh the issues with the scheme. I hope you'll therefore support your officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, admirably brief as well. I wonder if our councillors can manage that. I'm not expecting Kathy to do so, being she's first to speak, but we shall see. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, officers. Obviously, a very comprehensive report, as always. Thank you for your hard work over more than 2 years that this plan has taken to get to this stage. Thank you, Chair, and the other members who were able to brave the bitter weather yesterday for a site visit. I think it was worth the cold to see the area around the site and the style and location of the listed buildings mentioned, to be actually there and see how visible they are from the site and how visible the site is from them was really helpful, I think. I also think it's important that this application has come to committee. You'll have seen and heard that the Parish Council object, along with Malvern Hills Landscape Officer and Malvern Hills as Conservation Officer. But also there have been 232 comments from the public on this application in its various guises. And for that reason alone, without much public interest, it needed to be discussed in public. So over those 2 years that I've been mentioning, a number of issues, not least with highways and drainage, have been addressed, but some concerns do still remain. One of the concerns that I still have is regarding the 100% affordable claim of this site. It's that and the prioritising of local connection are used as reasons for compliance with SWDP 15, the Neighbourhood Plan, MNGR2. So it is important that we, and the Neighbourhood Plan MNGR3 as well for the local connection. It is important that we establish that. I'm glad to hear that there is a housing provider involved. Obviously, we don't know to what extent. I was concerned that if these were to be built and then it was found that no housing association were interested, we would be left with buildings in existence which weren't quite what we were expecting. Perhaps officers can help me with that later on. It is significant that there are 14 dwellings here rather than 10. And there is a maximum of 10 specified, not specifically for this site, but for new developments in the neighbourhood plan, I believe. 10 to 14 might not seem much, but it is nearly half again. And depending on, if we bring back that plan that we saw earlier, if it's possible at all to do that, the first one that you had up. But when it does come up, just have a look at it, and depending on which 4 you remove, it could give you a great deal more flexibility, as the Parish Council put it, and a bit of space for some of the other considerations that people like our Conservation Officer and our Landscape Officer have asked to be taken into account. The Malvern Hills Landscape Officer, his overall comment is, I do not support development on this parcel of land in the fashion proposed. But he does comment, don't worry if it's going to cause real problems. I'm sure everybody's got the plan on their iPads anyway. But, you know, you just choose which 4 you're going to take out and see how much space you can make. The landscape officer says that this type of landscape is characterised by as defined by the County Council as enclosed commons landscape. It's characterised by, amongst other things, straight hedgerow boundaries to pastoral fields, and a dispersed pattern of isolated farmsteads and scattered wayside dwellings, or as one member of the public described it, the ragged edge of the village. I like that description because there are a lot of villages that have ragged edges, and it's part of their charm. The landscape officer says that this development as proposed would result in all of the hedgerow and grass verges to the north of the site, most of the hedge and half of the verge to the west of the site being replaced. The verges would be replaced by 2 metre wide paths, The hedges, who knows? One would hope being planted with native species, as we've mentioned, but the landscape officer is not hopeful in that he says that 70 to 80% chance of failure has been found in hedgerows within housing developments of this sort. Now, he does say that some of this, much of this possibly, could be avoided by a more considered layout, which, as I say, fewer houses would allow for. The conservation officer clearly still concerned about landscape, but in particular the impact of the landscape setting on the listed buildings that have been mentioned. There are 3 timber-framed Grade 2 listed buildings identified as potentially being affected by this officer. Cherry Tree Cottage, as we've mentioned, is very close. Apple Tree Cottage is next to it. Quakers Farmhouse is to the south, some distance away, but across open fields, so views to and from, which is important. SWDP 6 and SWDP 24 require development to conserve and enhance heritage assets. And Section 16 of the NPPF requires that local planning authorities conserve heritage assets in a manner appropriate to their significance. Now, we did hear earlier the shared estate history of these 3 properties. They were all part of the Blackmore estate. They have that shared history and the distinctly rural setting that surrounds them at the moment. The conservation officer says that the link between these buildings and their rural agricultural settings is considered to add to their significance. So as well as there being 3 of them, they are a group of 3, they have connection, and the setting of them is intrinsically part of their significance. There is a lot of intervisibility, I've been practicing that one, between Cherry Tree Cottage and this site. Anyone on the site visit would have noted that. One can see the other. That's all it comes down to, really. The conservation officer does say that it also should be noted that the plan proposed is for 2-storey buildings. Cherry Tree Cottage is predominantly 1.5 storeys, and the dominance in this built scale will be considered to adversely affect the setting of Cherry Tree Cottage. A couple more paragraphs, and then I will leave you to think about it and see if there's anyone prepared to speak to it as well. The character of Pick and End, says the conservation officer, is distinctly more rural than other parts of the village that you may have seen pictures of on that presentation. As such, the proposed development character, which remains that of a suburban cul-de-sac, their words not mine, would be considered harmful to the setting of the 3 listed buildings identified above. It is not considered that planting alone is enough to mitigate the damage to views looking out from and in both for Cherry Tree Cottage and Quakers Farmhouse, which, as I say, is just a field away. It's completely open. The design of the new builds is also not considered to be of sufficient quality to fully conserve and enhance the setting of the listed buildings. The designs offer the appearance of generic new dwellings, and if the planning officer were to be minded to approve the development, the conservation officer feels that this should be revised to better reflect the high quality design elements of the village. It may be useful, they say, to drop the height of a number of units, maybe add dormer windows as a feature to be more in keeping with the other properties around, and particularly the listed buildings. And chimneys, Douglas will be glad to hear, chimneys may also suit the location to break up the roofscape. In conclusion, the number of units proposed, which should be reduced and thereby negating, let's have a look, the conservation officer says that if we were minded to approve this development in this location, the number of units proposed should be reduced, thereby negating the need for so much associated infrastructure. In addition, the designs of the building should be amended to better reflect the setting. Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cathy. Councillor Tonwells, do you wish to speak?
Chairman, I would add just a bit, but much, as always, these days has been set out really very clearly indeed. I wonder if well, let me first of all thank those who were able to attend the site visit. And I think the jaw-dropping moment for all of us was when we walked down Picken End and turned our gaze to the right to look at Cherry Tree Cottage. It is the most quintessential English black and white thatched cottage you could ever wish to see. And unfortunately, our officers haven't got any photographs of it. So if you're unable to attend the site visit, you will have no idea what I'm talking about. But those of you who did will probably have that in that image clearly in your minds. Now, all I can do is encourage you to look at the plan there, where you can see Tree that's Cherry Tree Cottage. It doesn't really do it justice, really, does it? But what it does do is describe its relationship with this development. And the first thing you'll notice, and I paste it out, is it's 8 metres from the edge of that property to the boundary. Okay, 8 metres. And then, if you look at the plan I set out here, the detailed plan, the nearest built structure is I don't know, 15 metres away, 20 metres away. We are talking, in fact, Cherry Tree Cottage is probably marginally closer to those properties than actually the properties to the south are. That's how close it is. If you were to put the footprinting proximity onto that development site, it would actually be closer than the property to the south. That's how close it is. Which made me wonder why we actually go to the trouble of listing buildings at all. What is its purpose? Its purpose isn't just to protect the integrity of the building, but also its setting. And as Cass said, and I wouldn't begin to try to find the word, but the interrelationship between Cherry Tree Cottage and, as a listed building, heritage asset and the development is two-way. And that's really important. I can't imagine a more stark relationship. I wonder if I could persuade the officers to turn back a few, scroll back a few, so we can see the design of the buildings we're now talking about. So imagine that black and white, half-timbered cottage. Well, actually, no, go could you, sorry, Chairman, through you. Could you go back to that? Because I think that's really quite a useful one, because there you can see Cherry Tree Cottage and its relationship with this field. It's pretty clear there, isn't it? The other two heritage assets slightly further away, one to the south, Quaker's Farm, and Apple Tree Cottage to the right, as it were, looking at Cherry Tree. But it's Cherry Tree Cottage particularly I want to focus on. Could we now turn to the illustrative designs? So keep in your mind, that'll do. Keep in your mind the relationship between what I've described and what we see on the screen. Just get you. I'm trying to absorb that thought. Because in essence, there's so many issues here, the lack of an ecological up-to-date appraisal, the lack of a travel plan, the question marks about, questions about who's going to manage the site if it were permitted tonight, and so on and so forth. But to me, the real essence of this application is the relationship between this new built environment and the heritage assets, particularly Cherry Tree Cottage. And it's that relationship that I'm particularly concerned about. I look at our current policies, SWDP 6, for instance, talks about the historic environment, where we should make sure proposals will be supported where they conserve and enhance the significance of heritage assets. Does this, Chairman, support, conserve and enhance the significance of the heritage assets adjacent to it? Because that's what that policy asks us to do. I can't remember, Chairman, I'll finish now. I can't remember an application for 14 dwellings that's created over 200 objections. That would usually come with a major application site of 800,000 houses. For 14 houses to generate that many, that's really helpful. Chairman, can we pass this around? Someone has produced a photograph of Cherry Cottage. Is that, with your permission, could people see that? They've all got it on their screens already. Thank you. That's really helpful. So, Chairman, I do think it's contrary to some of our key policies, and it really does bring into question the whole purpose of listing buildings in the first place. I don't quite know why our conservation officer's comments, which support what I'm saying, are kind of noted and duly disregarded. They're a statutory consultee. We wouldn't disregard the highway officer's advice. So I do think our conservation officer's response is important, as indeed is the landscape officer's response. So I'm interested to hear what other people have to say. We're not moving anything at this stage, but we'll hopefully come back to us in due course. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments from our other councillors? Anybody? Councillor Watley.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be helpful if the officers, through you, sir, could give us clarity on those two issues Councillor Mr Wells has raised, the ecological plan and the travel plan, and their current currency and applicability. That's the first question. And the second one, again through you to the officers, what obligations, if any, do we have as a council relating to density of provision?
Firstly, with regard to the reptile survey, there was a more up-to-date ecological survey, the Bat Activity Report, which also touches on other species within it, which is in date. But if reptiles or newts are a concern, you can obviously quite reasonably put on a pre-commencement check condition so that a qualified ecologist would go out on site before anything happens, any clearance, check for newts. If they are, they're protected species, and it would be for the developers to mitigate and do any timing requirements or anything that would be required. It's unlikely that there would be any significant issue because there hasn't been any picked up in the previous surveys, but if that is a concern, that would be a reasonable condition to add. With regard to transport, the travel plan, that's a standard sort of condition that highways request. They have requested, it's in the conditions, or the transport statement, all the speed surveys and all the other documents that highways had asked the applicant for have been provided, have satisfied highways, they've got no objection at this juncture. So I'm not really sure what's sort of missing in that regard.
Chairman, could I just help? I'm not sure we've seen a travel plan in its supportive documentation.
The travel plan, like I say, would be a standard conditioned item. You wouldn't usually have it at this stage. That was why it's recommended as a condition. It's something that you give to residents on their occupation. So it's usually prior to occupation condition. And the final issue is the density. Yep. As always, I mean, there is the sort of 30 dwellings per hectare stated in the policies, but as with all rural areas, you need to judge it by the character of the area and the built density of the area, because you can't necessarily have 30 dwellings per hectare everywhere, and equally there might be places where you have 75 dwellings per hectare in the locality, and it's more appropriate to have a higher density. So I would lead you to the second part of that particular policy, which talks about character of the area, and I think that's the most appropriate way to judge density. Having said that, we are required by national and local policy to make the best use of land, and that means not refusing an application on something as spurious as a sort of a number that's been given to a site if a higher number of units can be reasonably accommodated in a manner that's satisfactory. So, is that make sense? Yeah.
It makes sense. I'm not sure it answers the dilemma, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I, whilst we got onto questions, lack of housing association identification, is that a material factor or not in their considerations? The lack of identifying a housing association.
Chairman, I think not at this stage. We've had the answer from the applicant's agent on that. That affordable housing provider would come forward. They're obviously in discussions with somebody, and there might well be a signatory possibly to the subsequent legal agreement if members were minded to grant permission. If members resolved to grant permission and the legal agreement stalled, then the permission wouldn't be forthcoming. The permission's only released after the legal agreement is signed. So occasionally that does happen with applications where they don't reach the end of the process, and then another application would have to come forward. There's a number of possibilities, you know. So.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wondered if it's normal for housing associations not to kind of put their name to things until planning permission is granted. That was given as the reason for not being able to say who it was that was interested. And I just wondered if that's standard, because I've not had much experience on that. So not unfeasible then.
I've had one in and then drop out and had to get somebody else. So and another one, whilst we talked about local preference, which is normally for these rural sites part of the conditions. Would that be standard in this, or would that have to be added in if it were approved?
Yeah, that would be in the 106, and again, that's quite standard for these kinds of developments. In response to what Councillor Wells has just said, I don't think there is a standard. I think we sometimes get applications that come from developers who are looking to then potentially sell on a site, so they might not have the registered provider in place. And then sometimes you do have a registered provider, and like Councillor Clark says, occasionally they drop out and then you get movement. So I don't think there is an actual standard that we get in terms of the approach.
Right, do I have anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Wilmot.
Can I ask, the neighbourhood plan, is that in date and valid?
So the answer seems to be it's still valid to mid-January. No, last January, so
Yeah.
it's out of date.
I think it is out of date. It's under review at the moment.
Yeah, right. Councillor Harrison.
I'll just try and clarify that last point if I can. I spoke to Andy Ford today, who said that the neighbourhood plan at present is in date. It's due to run out in the middle of January, and they have put in an application for updating the neighbourhood plan. But there are some technicalities at present, but that will obviously have to be sorted out. But that looks like it might be immaterial to this. I'd like to go, if I can, to your next page, I think it is, with the plan that's got the houses on it. I do have some concerns with that. Yeah. You move to another one. No. The plan. No, that'll do. The master plan. Yeah, that'll do. That'll do. There are, I think, somebody will probably put me right, but it looks like that the flats or masonettes or what have you are the ones in the bottom left-hand corner, from what I understand. Now, interestingly, unfortunately, you can't blow it up on there, I don't think, But there are footpaths or concrete paths that go round this block, which is very interesting. And sorry? Yes. And on the left-hand side as you're there, which is on the same side as the school, there is an access from these 4 properties. But there is no footpath. The footpath stops immediately after the turning. You can see it's shaded, and you can see the footpath only goes to there. That is not acceptable, to have 4 properties that are coming out of that particular site onto such a main road as that through Hanley Swan. And I don't think that's acceptable. But I'll just carry on a little bit further, because there's lots of hedges going to be possibly taken down. Now, at this present moment in time, on the Hanley Castle side where the school is, there is a ditch. So they're going to take the hedge out and probably put another one in place. I can't see any condition about putting one in, but I assume that there might be one there, so I'll leave that. Not too bothered about that. But you've got the ditch that runs across the front of the property. Then if you go down to the little lane that's on the northern side, again you've got a similar thing. You've got the hedge going to be taken out. Now there is a prominent ditch along there as well, but it has been sort of filled in over time. And then obviously it's going to be piped where you've got the access that goes across from the road. So you'll have 3 of those, and then you've got a further one on the right hand side or the east side where the footpath joins the road. Now immediately to the right of that is a pond, but it's not shown on any of the plans. I think the residents would probably be able to confirm this. The letters seem to confirm that there's a pond there. And this obviously worries me, because you've got no drainage from this site out into any ditches. It's all been done on either craters or something like that, which you've got on that there, and going to the Suds Pond. Now, I'm not daft, I hope, but water can't flow uphill. I wish it would, because I'd be a millionaire trying to work out how to do it. But there's no outflow from the Suds Pond. I'm told it's not required, but in this day and age, with all the flooding that we have, I would think that an outflow from the pond to either the ditch that is on the left, or even better still, the drainage, which is on the other side of the road, which they're going to connect to. And you can see that up by the main entrance. There's a connection going across to the main highway drainage and what have you. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm just a gentleman that's sort of worried about drainage and flooding and what have you. And we haven't even, or I haven't even seen, and I've had a good look through all the plans, I haven't even seen any heights of what the land is on that plot. Could I just ask, Anna, is there any plans with the current heights of the land that's been submitted?
I don't think we do have the spot levels. That may be something that councillors want to consider adding a condition, because I don't think it's been covered in the conditions for slab levels, but I will just quickly double
Well, the thing that I'm
check that.
worried about is we have various sites in my village and probably in other villages. If you don't have the original level, then the developers don't like getting rid of topsoil, so they'll pile it up and build everything up as high as they can, and then they put the slab level in, and then they start building on top of that. So you finish up with everything on the site going to be 1 or maybe 2 metres higher than the actual field level. I'll leave it at that. But I am worried about the pond in the top right-hand corner, northeast corner, and particularly because people have said that there's newts, and particularly because somebody says that the report is out of date.
Right. Do I have anybody else wishing to contribute? Councillor Pam Cummings.
So could I just ask a question, please, about the neighbourhood plan? Was the view from this site towards Cherry Tree Cottage, or vice versa, was that labelled in the neighbourhood plan that it was a sort of key view?
Not as a key view. There is reference to Cherry Tree Cottage in the allocated site wording, but apologies. The policy for the allocated site, which is set out in my report. I can find the page for you briefly. In paragraph 7.2.5, which talks about policy NGR7 of the neighbourhood plan, the relationship to Cherry Tree Cottages discussed in that neighbourhood plan policy. So I think
Okay,
that's
thank
probably
you.
the most relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Cummings.
It strikes me that if you look at the neighbourhood plan in relation to this site, the area where it falls out with the proposal with us tonight is the number of properties rather than the principal or anything else. Apparently there's room for 15 on the standard hectares, and they put it may be reduced to 10. So I think there's scope on that. But apart from that, I can't really see any reason, having looked at the neighbourhood plan, why we shouldn't do what that says and pass it through. But that is an issue I have with the number.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Wells, you want to come back?
Chairman, thank you. And just picking up Paul's comment, first of all, I think Paul's comments are sound. But the neighbourhood plan, one of the first in the district, by the way, they were real trailblazers at the time. I was pointing lots of parish councils towards them because they were ahead of the game. And I think, Paul, your comment about the interrelationship between this site and the adjacent heritage asset is a key component in creating the number of a maximum of 10. I think the two, that equation is what we're talking about this evening. And without wishing to predetermine what another configuration might look like, in general terms, if you were to remove the 4 properties to the to the east of the site, to the right as you look, and therefore create some kind of buffer between the Cherry Tree Cottage and create a situation where the site looked not towards Cherry Tree Cottage but actually coming off the main road, and I think it would feel a bit different. I suspect that's what the parish council had in mind when they were thinking of a maximum of 10, but I don't want to start doing sort of planning on the hoof here. I wanted to pick up a point that I didn't really have a chance to properly explore with Anna earlier when you referred to this as an exception site. Now, my understanding is an exception site is only ever granted if it's dependent on an up-to-date housing needs survey, not interrogating the housing waiting list at the platform, but actually conducting a local rural housing needs survey. And on the basis of that, you could then identify a potential exception site. That, unless that's changed recently, I think we'd be making a mistake to call it an exception site. So it would need to come forward as an exception site on the back of an up-to-date village housing needs survey, rather than just going to platform and seeing what waiting list might be there. Otherwise, we're going to be seeing exception sites all over the place in every village outside the settlement boundaries, So we just need to be careful about that. I would just urge some caution. Chairman, I think there are perfectly sensible grounds for refusal if members are minded to go down that route. And the conservation officer and the landscape officer provided the text that we could incorporate if we wanted to do that. My question to the committee is really simple. Is this the best we can do with this site? Or can we do better? I think we can do better. So I'm going to move refusal.
Thank you, Tom. I'll ask you for your reasons in a second. Councillor Caffey-Wells, are you seconding that?
I would be happy to second it, and I'm happy to give you some reasons if that's useful.
We'll see if Tom agrees with that.
I'll go first.
We will indeed.
Just to come back on that point, my understanding is that you're right, we don't have an up-to-date housing needs survey, but that actually puts us in a difficult position, particularly when you get to appeal, because that is a requirement that we should have, really. So we use that data to make those judgments. So we would judge whether it's an exception site against the data we have. It wouldn't be reasonable to just say, well, we don't have an up-to-date survey, so therefore we're not going to allow anything as an exception site. We have to use the data that is available to us, and that's the way in which these applications are judged, and other exception sites are generally dealt with until whatever point when we do have that data.
Chairman, without wishing to over-egg the point, I mean, could you possibly reflect on that? Because I don't believe that's correct. I'm really sorry to say that. It's not something I'd want to say, but could you, because it's important, Chairman, because if we're going to suddenly spawn lots of applications without any up-to-date data on sites outside settlement boundaries in all our villages, my goodness me, we're going to be in busy time. My understanding is, and that's why our housing department started doing housing needs surveys a couple of years ago. You may remember, there was one in Lysington. The local members didn't even know about it. Ditto other villages too, Kemsey, I think. And it was on the back of those up-to-date housing needs surveys that we then saw spawning applications. If we're not going to do the housing needs surveys, and we're simply going to say to the development, this sort of development or others, actually, you don't need an up-to-date housing needs survey. We will just interrogate the waiting list at the local social housing provider. Can I just ask, because it's really important at that point, and it's been expressed in the public domain, that we get some clarity, not now, but get some clarity on that.
I will say that at an appeal on a site for low-cost housing in my village, the inspector, we didn't have a local, and he allowed it on the figures that were given by the Housing Association. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of chance to interrogate them by the way it was done. Right, Councillor Caffey-Wells, you will go give your reasons.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, whether it's an exception site or not, we're not really looking so much at the principle of development here. Some people would say that because it's in the neighbourhood plan that that isn't really an argument that would stand up at appeal. So I think the strongest concerns about the proposal are regarding the landscape and regarding the impact that has on the setting of those listed buildings. So I would be looking, if it were agreeable, to move something of the sort. The proposal would be, by reason of its density, scale, massing and design, out of keeping with the character and quality of the area, and therefore remove the rural character so intrinsic to the setting of the nearby listed buildings, thereby adversely impacting their significance. I mean, we can play with those words, but as a result of that, accordingly, the proposal would be contrary to SWDP 6 and 24, SWDP 21, paragraph 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and RE1 and DES1 of the Neighbourhood Plan, which we now accept is in date. And since we've been talking about it and how it affects this proposal all evening, I think we can't have it both ways. If it's significant in all its aspects.
Thank you. And Tom, you're willing to accept those reasons for your proposal?
Chairman, Chairman, it might need a little bit of finessing, but I think you're getting the broad brush of where I think Kath is coming from.
Just the one point that I noted, I don't know whether I just didn't hear it or whether you did say it, is you've talked about policies 6 and 24 of the SWDP, which relate to impacts on heritage assets. I don't know if you specifically said. No, I just mean in the reason. Sorry, have you specifically said harmful to the impact of the? Oh, okay. Apologies, that was just me, not. It doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's got the character and quality of the area, the setting of the nearby listed buildings, and how it adversely impacts their significance, and obviously the density, scale, massing, and design, then we can work around that.
Sorry, could I just check with you as well which policies you'd quoted, just make sure that we're
Sure, yeah. I had said, accordingly, the proposal would be contrary to SWDP 6, 24, 21, paragraph 130, so 130 of the NPPF and of the Neighbourhood Plan, RE1 and DES1. Give you a bit of background on what each of those is, if it's helpful. But
bear with me 1 second.
Yes, 130. 130's.
Sorry, it was just I also picked up in terms of the density, and in the conversation we were talking about the loss of hedgerow as part of it. So I'm wondering whether that should also include RE3 if you're looking at that, replacing natural loss features through development, although I don't know the wording of that policy, so I don't know whether yeah. Yeah, I think that probably would be relevant if you're wanting to include the loss of the natural features like the hedgerow as part of your concerns. And yeah, and I didn't know, again, because you've mentioned the landscape impact and the landscape character, whether that's confined to the local setting. So then SWDP 21 is probably the most relevant, or whether in addition 25, which is the sort of wider landscape character, but I'll leave that with you too.
Chairman, can I propose that rather than get into the absolute fine detail, we allow our officers to go away and perhaps consult with yourself and local members on the final wording? But I think we've got the stress there very clearly.
I think we're pretty clear.
Chairman, can I just say something? obviously the developers can take this to appeals, we all know this. But presumably though, if another planning application was to come in with less impact on the listed building, and the fact that the local plan, the local neighbourhood plan that we just have learnt is still in date, they could in fact come back with a new planning application for 10 dwellings anyway, which then would be very difficult for us to actually turn down. That was just a comment that I wanted to make, that was all.
Can I correct something, that the neighbourhood plan was adopted in January of 2019?
It's out of date, yeah. But, yeah. Never mind. Right. Right, so I think we can go to the vote now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairs. All of those in favour of the proposal to refuse planning application contrary to officer recommendation, please raise your voting cards. 1, 2, 3. All those against the motion? 3.
Great.
Any abstentions?
It's me.
1, 2,
So I've got to make a
3,
casting
4.
vote.
So casting vote from the chairman.
I understand is normally a casting vote would be to retain the present position. And therefore I will vote against officer's recommendation.
Yes, Chair, so the motion to refuse has been carried.
No idea, yes, I'll be here next year. Right, that's all, folks. You can go home. Hope you have a good festive season.